told to wake that up every night to make sure it's transition. Now I'll need to wake you up a little bit here, I think. Because I've already been warned, some people, I'm not going to name any names, but some people have threatened to take a nap. I know the challenge before me. When the belly is full, the eyelids get heavy. I might have to walk about. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to stay in the camera sighting, but that's okay. But I'm thankful for many things. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be here and to be invited to participate in the meeting, and I'm thankful that we've had these last 5 days together. I will cherish that time. And I pray and I hope that the meeting has been helpful to you. I want to talk to you about running the race. And I know that when you're tired, talking about running is probably the last thing you want to do. But the Christian life is compared to a race. It's compared to a soldier in a war, a boxer in a fight, and a runner in a race. And we get this passage from Hebrews 12, 1 through 3. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance. Now listen, the race that is set before us. I want to stop there for just a second and talk about the fact that runners in a race do not prepare the course because the course is set before them. And in life, we do not have control over the course. It is set before us. There will be hills, there will be valleys, there will be obstacles, there will be pain, there will be heartache, there will be heartbreak, and there are things beyond our control. It is not our responsibility to prepare the course. Our responsibility is to prepare the runner. And the Hebrew writer is telling us three things in this context on how we can prepare ourselves to run the race victoriously. The first thing that he does is he reminds us that we can win, and therefore we are to run with confidence. If I were to ask you today, are you going to win? If I were to ask you today, are you going to make it? And when we talk about winning, we're talking about heaven. When we talk about making it, we're talking about salvation. Beyond this world and into the next, we are going to be saved and we're going to heaven when we die. If I were to ask you today, are you going to win? How confident would you be? Now listen, if you've never obeyed the gospel, you do not have any reason at all to be confident. And you should be worried, to be honest. You should be worried. And you should be anxious about it until you resolve to do something and then do something about it. But often, many of us in the church are not as confident as we should be. In the church, we might be asked, are we going to make it? I hope so. I pray so. But the Hebrew writer wants us to know that we can win and we are to run, not with doubt, not with uncertainty, but with a confidence that will make the joy, will give the Christian life the joy that it deserves and that it demands. Notice here, we can run with confidence because we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Whenever a verse or even a chapter begins with the word therefore, we know it's there for a reason. It connects doctrine that has previously been laid out with duty that is about to be stated. Sometimes it connects doctrine with duty, and sometimes it connects doctrine with beauty. Therefore, we also are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. What is he doing? He is actually pulling from the ancient arena, the Olympics. Back in the day when the Olympics originated, it began, the runners in the Olympics would be surrounded by statues or busts of former winners. And as they're running, they look up at past successors and successful victors, and they are reminded that this race can be won. And that's the idea, that there's a cloud of witnesses that are testifying that it is possible to be successful in this race. You can win it. You can win it. And we know you can because others have. Now, the word therefore connects chapter 12 with chapter 11. And what do you see in chapter 11? You see examples, a great cloud of witnesses. Hebrews chapter 11 is known as the Hall of Faith. We call it the Hall of Faith because we have examples of men and women of faith. And we usually use this chapter to define and emphasize active faith. What faith is? It is obedient. But I actually think that there is a deeper level that the Hebrew writer wants us to get to. It's not just so that we can define what faith is, but we can see what faith does, in that not only does it obey, but it perseveres. And each of these examples are showing us men and women who persevered in spite of obstacles, in spite of opposition. He begins with Abel. Here is a man that served God. He did what was right. He did what was well-pleasing. And by faith, Abel offered a more excellent sacrifice than his brother Cain. Cain didn't like it. He hated it. In fact, he was so jealous that he killed his brother. But even though Abel is dead, he being dead still speaks. And what does he say? That there is something better. That there is something greater. And he persevered. Even though he was the first martyr, so to speak, he persevered. Noah, here was a man that was really outnumbered in his day. He was told by God, warned by God of the flood, and he built the ark for the saving of his house. He was mocked and ridiculed, and he preached to an unbelieving world, but yet he persevered. And he was successful because he obeyed God, and his faith did not betray God. And we see Abraham, of course, as we've been talking about, how that this man, by his faith, obeyed God. He went to a land, had no idea where exactly he was going to land, and we see that he sojourned in the land because he looked for a city with foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And we see Joseph, here is a man that was rejected by his own brothers threw him in a pit, and he was betrayed and sold as a slave. He ended up in a situation where he was falsely accused, and he was cast into a prison. But what did God do? God elevated him. God was with him. There was no indication that God ever spoke directly to him, but Joseph, he had enough faith, and God at the end elevated him to the prime minister in the palace of Pharaoh. And here we see Moses. Here is a man that also had to choose. Even though he was raised in the palace of Pharaoh, it came a point when he had to decide what was he going to do. The Bible says he chose to suffer affliction with the people of God rather than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. And so we find Moses, he suffered, he endured, he was rejected, but he made it through. And we could go on and talk about Joshua and Rahab, Gideon and David. And he went on and talked about others whose names are not given, how that they are examples of perseverance. And in spite of what others thought of them and did to them, and in spite of what the world put on them, the world who was really not worthy of them, the Bible says that they were victorious and they were successful and they persevered. And the point is, we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses that we can run with confidence because we can win. God wants us to win. Let us lay aside every weight and sin which so easily ensnares us. Now, in order to win, there are some things we've got to do. It's not a given We can't just run with confidence and say, well, God's going to do it all and I have to do nothing. There are things we've got to set aside. We've got to set aside every weight and every sin. Not every weight is a sin, but every sin is a weight. And there are some things that are not necessarily sinful, but that weigh us and bog us down and will trip us up. But there are sinful habits that have to be overcome. There are things that we have to turn from. And these things will, if we carry them with us, will hinder us and distract us and keep our eyes off of the prize. Notice in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, Paul says, as he uses the language of a race, do you not know that those who run in a race run all? In an earthly race, everybody's competing against each other. But one receives the prize, but run in such a way that you may obtain it. Now here's the difference between the Christian race and an earthly race. When we run, there's more than one winner. There's more than one person who can be successful. In fact, we don't win unless we help others win. That's the point, that we have this wonderful advantage. We're not alone. But he says here that you need to run in such a way as those who would run in an earthly race, you need to run to win, that you may obtain it. You know, many times Christians like to dabble. They can't make up their mind. Are they in or are they out? Are they committed or are they not? But he says you need to remember what you're running for. You need to remember what you're doing here. We're not playing around. This isn't a game. This is a race for a true prize. And you need to run in order to obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. You know, in an earthly race, people will run and condition, and they will train, and they will practice, and they will discipline their bodies. They will take care, make sure that they eat right, they get enough sleep, they get enough exercise, they are temperate in all things. And they do that. Why do they do that? So that they can obtain a perishable crown. Something that is really not going to mean a lot in the long run. My kids aren't here, so I can say something that will embarrass them if they were here, because it's really kind of embarrassing really to me, but I admit it, but it proves the point. I have in my attic a lot of 5th grade trophies. Trophies that's kind of where I peaked, about the 5th grade. So I've got some boxes that have some trophies, have some track trophies, have some basketball trophies. I don't know why I kept them, but I did. But if you ever came over to my house and I had those trophies on the mantle, you'd probably think, it was a little detached from reality. A little, elevating his importance just a little too much. 5th grade trophies. And I get it. Now, I'm not trying to diminish sports, because sports has its place, right? We like the team. We like what it teaches. There's a lot of great things. But we need to put it in its place. And there's a lot of people that are pursuing a lot of crowns that are going to mount to a hill of beans, if that. Back in the day, the runners in the Olympiads would wear laurel wreaths, foliage on their head. And if you wore an Olympic, not a medal, but a wreath, that was your boast. And a lot of times they would sail through life and they would rest on their laurels. That's where that expression came from. You're resting upon past successes, and therefore you don't really do anything else. But you know what those crowns were? It's foliage. They faded and they failed and they passed away. They broke apart and they didn't last long. And Paul is saying, if people in this life are willing to do that for something that's not going to last long, what are we going to do for that which is going to give us eternal reward, but we for an imperishable crown? Therefore I run thus. not with uncertainty. Paul, are you going to be saved? Are you going to heaven? Where are you going, Paul? I'll tell you where I'm going, he said. I know where I'm going. It is certain. I have the confidence because I'm not trusting in myself. I'm going to run, but I can win not because of me, but because of him. And I'm going to do all that I can. I fight not as one who beats the air, but I discipline my body. Is there anything for you to do, Paul? Has Jesus done all the work? Well, Jesus paid it all, but there's something for me to do. And he says, I discipline my body. In one place he says, I die every day. I die daily. I buffet my body. Now we buffet our bodies, don't we? We have a great spread, and we're not used to disciplining ourselves and telling ourselves no. Paul says in the Christian life, you lay some sin aside, you have every weight that will beset you and stumble you and get you off track. And I bring it under subjection, lest when I preach to others, just because you teach and you preach doesn't mean you don't have to live. Paul says, I have to make sure I'm practicing what I preach, lest I should become disqualified. Run with confidence, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your mind. You look to Jesus and you consider him. There's two things, emphatic statements here. Looking unto him. You keep your eyes on him. You keep your eyes on him. Others may forsake you. Others may betray you. Others may use and abuse you, but you are not converted to them. There are people that leave the Lord or they abandon the church because they have their eyes on people or pleasure or problems. And it's just like Peter whenever he stepped out of the boat and he began to walk on the water. He was doing the impossible until he took his eyes off of the Lord and seeing the winds and the waves. He began to sink. Consider him. People going to treat you right? No, not always. They didn't treat him right. Who considered hostility against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your soul. Keep your eyes on him. You can win this. Now the devil, he knows you can also be defeated, and he's going to do everything he can to distract you, get you to stumble, and get you to quit, and get you discouraged. And therefore, the second thing we must do is to run with endurance. The word endurance means patience. The word patience comes from a word sometimes translated long suffering, which can be broken into two, suffering long. If you're patient, you suffer long. The Christian race is not a sprint. It's a marathon. I came across some information, an interview of a man who had been successful in running 4 Boston marathons, and the interviewer was asking him, what does it take to run and win marathons? 26.2 miles. And he said, well, it takes a lot of intense training. It takes a lot of physical training, but also a lot of mental training. You got to be mentally tough. And so he says, you got to prepare 3 or 4 months ahead of time. And I thought, if I had to run that, it'd be like 3 or 4 years ahead of time, right? But he says, really, there are only 2 critical places in the race. The first is at the beginning. He says you feel good and you're tempted to exert yourself and you're really running, and if you don't pace yourself too much, you will spend all your energy and you'll run out and you'll not have enough to finish. I thought, isn't that analogous of the Christian life? When you first start off, you're ready to take on the world and wrestle the devil, and you're ready to just do everything, and you've done all, and you're so excited and you're so energetic. And then, if you're not careful, you don't pace yourself and realize that this is a lifelong commitment, and something happens, and you don't have enough faith to finish. But then he said, the second critical part in this race is around the 20-mile marker. In the 20-mile marker in the Boston Marathon, there is a hill that you have to climb. It is called Heartbreak Hill. And he said, when you get up on the top of that hill, there's a police officer with a cherry picker with a bullhorn, and he's calling out to the runners, you have just run Heartbreak Hill. It is all downhill from here. And he says, there might be a descent, but when you look up and you see hill after hill after hill after hill, and it is so heartbreaking because you realize there's still a whole lot more to endure. And the runners call it hitting the wall at heartbreak. And I thought, isn't that analogous of the Christian life? You're running along, things are going pretty good, and then you hit it. Heartbreak Hill. And when you get over one, or when you think you're kind of on the descent, you hit another, and it can be so discouraging at Heartbreak Hill. I preached this at home in Oakdale several months ago. There was one brother in the church that actually run a marathon. He met me in the back and he said, you know, the hardest part for me in the whole race was the point two. The point two at the very end was the hardest part. Run with endurance the race that is set before us. Last of all, we must finish with joy. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. We talked about the cross this morning. Do you think Jesus enjoyed the cross? No. Do you think Jesus relished in the prospects of the cross? We know he didn't. In fact, just a few hours before he died upon the cross, he was in the garden, and what was he praying? If it's possible, let this cup of suffering pass from me. When James in chapter 1 says, count it all joy, my brethren, when you fall into various trials, he's not saying we have to have some kind of a sick and twisted view of pain, and we kind of crave that. We don't really enjoy pain. That's not the point. Jesus did not enjoy the cross, but for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising its shame, and now he is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. Jesus also had a heartbreak hill, but his success was he was able to see past it and beyond it, and he looked beyond the hill, beyond the cross, and he saw the crown, and he endured the pain and the shame that he might receive the prize. And he finished with joy, and the Hebrew writers say, consider him. And you endure your cross. You don't have to enjoy the shame, no. But you can endure it because you can look past it. The Apostle Paul, in Acts chapter 20, was going back to Jerusalem, and Paul didn't really know what was going to happen to him there. He thought he might die. And notice his attitude when he goes into Jerusalem, and see now, I go bound in the Spirit to Jerusalem, not knowing the things that will happen to me there, except that the Holy Spirit testifies in every city, saying that chains and tribulations await me. So Paul said, I don't really know how this is going to end. All I know is that God has given me a pretty good indication and hint that it's not going to end well. You're going to have tribulations and chains wherever you go. And he said, I don't really know if it's going to be the end or not when I get to Jerusalem. What's your attitude about this, Paul? He says, but none of these things move me. Nothing moves me. How did it affect your faith, Paul? It didn't. Nor do I count my life dear to myself. That's another key, isn't it? If we count our life dear to ourselves, you know what we're going to do? We're going to do everything we can to avoid any problems and any pain and any sacrifice. But Paul says, I do not count my life dear to myself so that I may finish my race with joy. What? Paul, you're going to die? You might die in Jerusalem, but you're going to... He said, it's not the death that I'm looking at. It's beyond that. I'm going to finish my race with joy. And the ministry which I received from the Lord Jesus to testify of the gospel of the grace of God. We know the end. We know that Paul went to Jerusalem and he didn't die. We know that Paul went to Jerusalem and he appealed to Caesar. He went on. He went on and he got on a boat and they shipped him and he sailed to Rome. And he had, of course, before he got there, he had a shipwreck. There was a heartbreak. Then he was cast into prison. He got out. Another heartbreak, cast back into prison. But finally, in this Roman prison cell, this final time, he's going to write to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 7 through 8. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness. It's not one of those perishable crowns, but it's an imperishable crown which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day. And here you are. Here you are. Did you know you were in the Bible? Here you are. And not to me only, but to all those who loved his appearing. God's got a crown for you. And that makes it easier to endure the cross. As we close here, I want to tell you a little personal anecdote. You might be able to look at me and tell that I'm not probably giving you running advice from experience. There have been times, I enjoy running when I get into it, but it's easy for me to get out of it. But there were times in my life when I ran, and I want to tell you, because he's here tonight, there's a brother here, right there behind David Dean, his name's Scott Lynn, good friend of mine. He's a coach. Used to be a tennis coach, now he's got a new position there in Ada. And I think Scott, when I was living in Wichita Falls, he took pity on me and he invited me to run with him. And so we would, every Sunday night, he would come to my house. I think he ran to my house about 3 miles to get to my house, and then he would run with me about a mile or so, and then I'd go back. And we did this for a few months, it seemed like, in the heat of the summer, in Wichita Falls, Texas, where it's probably one of the hottest places in the world. At least it felt like it. And I want to give you 3 lessons. As I close my sermon today, I want to give you 3 lessons I learned from Lynn. The first lesson I learned was that once a week was not enough. We ran every Sunday, and every Sunday I would start to run, and I thought I've done this before. This feels like the first time. And it became very apparent that all of the gains that I had made the week before, I had lost because I wasn't getting enough. Once a week was not enough. Now listen, God has given us opportunities to feed, to be fed, and to be led. And the church here has opportunities for you to come together, to assemble together on Sunday morning and on Sunday night and on Wednesday night, and those are great. But even beyond that, you need to be studying and exercising your spiritual muscles every day, because once a week is not enough. And if you think 1 hour a week is enough, you're gonna feel the hurt when temptation comes, because all of the gains that you make that Sunday hour will be lost once a week. Was not enough. Something else, second thing I learned in that little experience was something he told me was, Jenny, no, he didn't say it this way, but this is kind of what he meant. I know you're out of shape. I know this is going to hurt, and you're going to feel the burn, you're going to feel the pain, but don't stop. Keep moving. Don't stop running until you're finished. You keep going. And then he said, even if you have to slow way down and you just barely move. In fact, there were times when I was running, but I was running slower than he could walk. It was that slow, but I kept moving and I kept going. And there were times when I would run by myself. I don't know if you knew this, but I'd be running and my lungs hurt, and I thought, what does Scott know? I'm going to stop. So I stopped. And I realized what Scott knew. Because I stopped because of my lungs, and I couldn't start again because of my legs. They cramped up. You ever known anybody to quit the church for one reason and then they decide, I can't go back for a lot of other reasons? If you quit for one reason, you'll find a lot of other reasons not to start again. So don't stop. Not even if you're hurt, not even if you have to slow way down, but you just keep moving and you keep going, because you don't stop until you're finished. And the last lesson I learned, one day, Scott came to my house and he said, we're going to go a different route. And the indication was, and I'm not saying he deceived me here, but the indication was it was going to be a route full of shade, and it was short, at least shorter. And I thought, okay, I like shade and I like short, let's go. And as we're running, I didn't spot an inch of shade on that road. And I don't know what his idea of short was, but it felt a lot longer than our normal route. And you know what I felt? Here's what I began to do. I began to well up in my mind and in my heart, and I became angry at Scott. Now, I can't talk when I'm running, but I did manage to exhale one question. I said, Scott, do your students hate you? And I'll never forget his response. He probably doesn't remember it as I do, but I remember it very vividly. He said, they always thank me later. Sometimes in life, God says to you, I've got a different path. It may not be shady and it may not be short. In fact, if we're not careful, we might even well up inside, and I know of people who get angry at God and even hate Him. But if they endure long enough in the heat of the day, and they don't stop until they finish, they will thank Him later. Run to win. Run with endurance and finish. Finish with joy. And someday when we are at the throne of God and He gives us a crown of righteousness that none of us deserve, it will be our opportunity to take that crown and cast it before Him. And He will allow us the victory for all eternity. And that's the race. That's why we're running the race. We're running to heaven. Let's run like it. Let's run like it. And let's not stop until we get there, because we can. And we can. The lesson is yours today. Thank you for your patience. If you're here tonight and you're not even in the race, you can't win unless you get in. You can't even win. You don't even have the hope of the prize until you get in. A lot of people are running in a race and they're not even qualified to be running. But they're doing good things and they're serving and sacrificing and they're worshiping, but they've never been baptized into Jesus Christ. Why? Why? Why are you waiting? If you've never been baptized into Christ, why don't you take the step and be put into Christ, and you will be qualified to run, and you will be prepared to win. And if you're here today and you've never been baptized, why are you waiting? We are here eager to help you, and we will assist you, and God will save you. And He will prepare for you a crown that does not fade away. We can assist you in that.